Okay, so you sent over this pretty detailed report on importing cars and car parts from Dubai to Spain, and
Yeah.
I gotta say, I was pretty surprised by some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I figured, there are probably a lot of people out there who either are thinking about maybe bringing a car over, or just interested in how it all works.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
regulations, the cost, and all that.
Yeah, and it can be a bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so let's try to make sense of it all for everybody today.
Right.
So the first thing that really jumped out at me is that the rules are different if you're bringing in a whole car versus just parts.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. For complete vehicles from outside the EU, like Dubai, the big thing you run into is this whole homologation thing to meet those EU standards for safety and emissions.
Right, homologation. So that sounds
Mhm.
kind of intimidating.
It can be a bit.
What does it actually mean for someone?
So basically, you've got to prove that the car meets all those European technical requirements, right? Now, if the car has a certificate of conformity, that's pretty much a manufacturer's declaration that it meets EU standards. So
Okay.
that's pretty straightforward.
It's easy.
But without it, you might need individual approval or something called a feature reducida, which is a technical data sheet from a Spanish engineer.
Okay.
And don't forget about age limits for used cars.
Right.
Usually no more than 4 years old for gasoline or hybrid and 5 for diesel.
So that's because of those emissions rules.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to that.
Makes sense. So what about just bringing in car parts?
Okay, yeah, so that's generally a simpler process.
Okay.
Standard import regulations apply for anything coming from outside the EU.
Okay.
But the important documents you'll need are a detailed commercial invoice, a certificate of origin, often you can get that from the Dubai Chamber of Commerce,
Okay.
and a packing list.
Okay.
And for shipping, it depends if it's by sea or air.
Yeah.
You'll usually need a bill of lading for sea freight or an airway bill if it's coming by air. And sometimes for certain parts, like specialized parts or high-value parts, you might actually need an import license.
Wow. Okay, so there's still some hoops to jump through there.
Yeah, a little bit.
So let's say I decide to go all in and import a whole car.
Okay.
What are the major steps involved?
All right, well, first of all, it all starts in Dubai.
Right.
You gotta find and buy the car, of course. A thorough inspection is super important, and
Yeah.
making sure there's clear legal ownership.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You definitely want to get a solid purchase agreement.
Right.
And honestly, using an experienced exporter in Dubai can save you a lot of headaches.
Yeah, I bet.
Okay, so once you've got the car, you'll need to get all the export documentation.
Okay.
This includes things like a certificate of export from the RTA.
Okay.
Sometimes it's called a police paper.
Okay.
You'll need the original registration card, which is called the mulquilla,
Mm-hmm.
passport copies, and potentially proof of your Spanish residency.
Wow, so a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, and if you're buying from a dealer, you'll also need a vehicle clearance certificate and an export invoice.
Okay, so you got to make sure you have all your ducks in a row.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so now you've got all your paperwork.
Okay.
How does the car actually get from Dubai to Spain?
Well, the most common way and definitely the most cost-effective is sea freight.
Okay.
It can either be shipped in a container or via RoRo, which stands for roll on roll off.
Okay.
That usually takes about 25 to 30 days.
Okay.
You'll get a bill of lading for that.
Okay.
Now, if you need it quicker, you can go with air freight.
Okay.
It's definitely a lot faster, but also a lot more expensive.
Right.
One thing to keep in mind is to remove any personal items from the car before shipping.
Oh, yeah, good point.
And think about getting shipping insurance just in case.
Right. Yeah, always a good idea.
All right, so the car arrives in Spain.
Okay.
What happens next?
Let's talk customs.
Exactly. So you have to declare the vehicle at customs.
Okay.
You'll need to present your bill of lading and proof of ownership. The main document you'll be dealing with is called the Single Administrative Document, or DUA.
Okay. DUA, got it.
Then there's import duty, which is 10%,
Okay.
and VAT, which is 21%.
Okay.
And that's calculated on the car's value plus the shipping costs.
Oh, wow. So that can add up.
It can, yeah, but there is an exception.
Really?
Yeah, if you're actually moving your residence to Spain
Okay.
and you meet certain criteria,
Okay.
like living in Dubai for over a year and owning the car for at least 6 months, you might actually be exempt from those.
Oh, wow. That's a big one.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so you clear customs and then what?
Well, after that, you'll get an import certificate from the tax agency,
Okay.
and then it's time for the ITV.
The ITV. So that's the Spanish vehicle inspection, right?
That's right. You have to book an appointment for that.
Okay.
And bring all your documentation.
Okay.
The original Dubai registration, the import certificate, and if you have it the certificate of conformity.
Okay.
If you don't have the coaxing, you'll probably need that feature review CETA that we talked about earlier. So at the ITV, they'll inspect the car for safety and make sure it meets emissions standards.
Okay.
And you might have to make some modifications depending on the car.
Okay.
And if everything checks out, you get the ITV card.
Okay, so you're almost there.
Yeah, almost ready to hit the road.
So what's the last step?
Last but not least, you got to register the car with the DG2.
The DGT, so that's the traffic authority, right?
That's it.
Okay.
You need to book another appointment.
Of course.
And gather even more documents.
Right.
You'll need the ITV card proof of ownership, proof that you paid the import duty, and VAT, the import certificate. Your ID proof of address in Spain, which is the Padrón.
Okay.
And a registration application form.
Sounds like a lot of paperwork.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah. And you also have to pay the registration tax.
Okay.
Now, that one can vary quite a bit because it's based on the car's CO2 emissions and market value.
Right.
And then there's the annual circulation tax that you pay to your local council.
Right.
And finally, there's a DGT registration fee.
Okay, so you pay all those fees and then...
Then finally, you get your vehicle registration certificate.
Okay.
And then you can get your Spanish license plates.
Finally.
You're ready to roll.
And you mentioned that a lot of this can be done online now, right?
Yeah, a lot of the steps you can actually do online through various websites like transport companies,
Yeah.
tax agency, the DGT ITV stations.
That's convenient.
It is, yeah. Especially if you have a digital certificate, it can make things a lot smoother.
So in your report, you also gave some examples of the costs involved.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that stood out to you there?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is just how much the total cost can vary.
Okay.
And a lot of that comes down to the registration tax.
Right.
Like you said, it's tied to CO2 emissions, so a more fuel-efficient car will obviously have a lower tax.
Yeah.
For example, importing a BMW that costs, say, 20,000 euro DA in Dubai could end up costing over 30,000 in total.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas a much cheaper car, like a Toyota that might only cost 1,000 in Dubai, could be around 3,700 euro all in. And then something in the middle, like an Audi for 7,000 in Dubai, could land somewhere around 12,000 to 13,000 in Spain.
Got it.
So shipping, import duty, and VAT, those are all significant costs.
Right.
But it's really that registration tax that can make a huge difference.
Makes sense. So I guess the bottom line is that importing can give you access to cars that you might not find in Spain.
Yeah.
Or potentially get a better price.
Right.
But there's a lot of paperwork, and the costs can be pretty significant.
Definitely. It's a complex process.
So if someone's thinking about doing this, what's the one thing you would tell them to really do their research on?
I would say definitely understand those homologation requirements
Okay.
and get a really clear estimate of what the registration tax is going to be for the specific car they're interested in.
Right, because that can really make or break the whole deal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been super informative.
Glad to hear it.
I think anyone listening who's even remotely considering importing a car from Dubai to Spain now has a much better idea what they're getting into.
Yeah, hopefully.
It's not as simple as it might seem at first, but it's definitely doable if you're prepared.
Exactly.
So for those of you listening, I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
Yeah.
What parts of this process make you think twice about importing? Or maybe what sparks your interest even more?
I know for me, I'd be really curious to learn more about how those homologation standards are changing,
Yeah.
how they might affect the types of cars you can import in the future. It's
Well,
always evolving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe someday it'll be a lot easier.
You never know.
We'll have to have you back on to discuss that.
Sounds good.
All right, well, thanks for joining us today on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening out there, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, we'll catch you next time.
See you later.